Welcome, listeners of Illusion to Temporal Discussion, the episode-by-episode Nightmare Retrospective podcast. I'm Martin Harder, and I am a vision of pride.
And I'm Martin O'Doney, and I am having visions of being a guest on one of the floats at the Manchester Pride weekend. And I'm not telling you what I'm dressed in, except to say that Dame Edna Everage was clearly lying all along about her chest size.
Today we'll be looking at Series 3, Episode 15. It was first broadcast on Friday the 8th of December, 1989. So I'm going to pull back the curtain here a bit and say that we're actually recording this bit at a later date because I made a up. So basically what happened was when I was writing the script, I accidentally put the dates for the last episode in instead of the dates for this episode. So I read out the news stories for Friday the 8th instead of Friday the 15th.
I wasn't going to mention any of this, so I don't want to get any of the blame when everybody starts laughing at you.
Today we'll be looking at Series 3, Episode 15. It was first broadcast on Friday the 15th of December 1989. Drug Baron, how do you pronounce this?
It's a Jose Gonzalo Rodriguez Gacha, or Gacha, I think it's pronounced Gacha.
Drug Baron, what he said, was killed by Colombian police on this day.
I said Jose Gonzalo Rodriguez Gacha. I may be wrong about the Gacha pronunciation, so I must stress that.
He was also known by the nicknames Don Sombrero and El Mexicano. He was one of the leaders of the notorious Medellin cartel, alongside the Orocha brothers and Pablo Escobar.
The notorious Pablo Escobar, one of the most notorious Colombian drug lords of all time.
His death came about due to a collaborative effort between the Colombian government, the Cali cartel, the FARC guerrillas, the DEA, Victor Carranza's emerald businessman.
Victor Carranza! Say it with a bit of music in your voice. Come on.
Victor Carranza.
Yeah, that's good.
All of whom he was at war with.
This effort culminated in Gacha being cornered on a plantation by a helicopter armed with a mounted machine gun. He died after being shot in the face. Or at least, that's what the CIA tells everybody.
Do you want to get all conspiracy theorist about this then?
O'Doney's Conspiracy.
Anytime a Mexican or Colombian drugs baron dies, you know the people who are really behind it are the CIA, and they've done it because the guy's become more harmful than beneficial to them. It's the world's greatest open secrets, and we're going to be saying this on a podcast that we're going to be putting up on the internet. So it's the podcast, just to reiterate, is made by Martin Harder.
Hang on, Martin. What's that red dot on your forehead right now?
I don't know, but it seems to have shifted to yours rather suddenly. As soon as I said Martin Harder, it makes the podcast, it disappeared from my forehead. And now there's a lovely shiny red dot on yours. In the singles charts, we've got something that I don't really like, so you can tell us about it.
Well, I'm not really that keen on this one either. It's Let's Party by Jive Bunny and the Master Mixers. This is essentially their Christmas song. It begins with Noddy shouting, "It's Christmas!" It's the same sort of thing as they've done for all their other singles. As someone who does actually quite enjoy Jive Bunny and the Master Mixers, even I have to admit it's getting a bit old now.
Yeah, well, it was 33 years ago. And making its way to the top of the UK box office, we thought it was Ghostbusters 2, but actually it was returning to the top. It was Back to the Future Part 2.
Did the film travel to the future to become number one again, or did we go back to the past where it was still number one?
I find sitting back watching Back to the Future Part 2 remarkably, well, I have to say it, although it sounds ridiculous when you're talking about travelling into the future, I find it very nostalgic. It's not just because of the 1980s special effects, it's because even the future segments in the film is set in the year 2015. And that's 7 years ago. So in fact, we're looking in on the past now. It's a very, very odd alternative timeline where kids appear to wear their clothes inside out and the well-dressed brigade wear two ties. I don't see where that happened. And of course, everybody is still wondering, when do I get my flying car?
They did actually get one thing right, though. The Cubs did win the World Series in 2015.
A lot of people were really rather frightened by that. Although it wasn't quite as ridiculous then as it would have seemed back in the 1980s.
One other thing that does interest me about Back to the Future Part 2 is it's one of the few films that ends with a trailer for its own sequel.
It's because they were actually making the two films at the same time. The sequences from Back to the Future Part 3 that they include in the trailer, they're actually all outtakes. remakes. None of them are actually the ones that got into the final edit of the film.
And now time turns, the recording light burns, time out is gone, the podcast is on.
Ah, I'm glad you're here. It gets a bit boring during temporal disruption. Merlin usually sleeps anywhere. And talking to a load of frozen statues is distinctly unrewarding. Now let's see. What's the score? Ah, yes, it's still only 10-0 to the dungeon. And that's because young Martin from Yorkshire and his friends, Lee, Jamie, and Darren, are surprisingly enough still with us. How are they faring? Well, why don't you judge for yourself? In Caverns Deep, an elven maid was goblin-bound and so enslaved that when young Martin set her free, she rewarded him right elvishly with hints and steps that took him through and safely down to level 2. Now, safe, I said, but then that's rich. For this far down, all life's at risk, and even Merlin, when you reach him, can turn grim if you fail to please him. But please they did, and answered both the questions, which with them he probed. So, now they're fleeing fast before a goblin squad of 4 or more. Can they survive? Can they be free? And more, can they reach level 3?
Have you noticed how Traeger, by this point in season 3, really has turned into a presenter from Play School? He's now so gentle with the audience. There's nothing sinister about what he represents anymore. It's such a shame, isn't it? I'm glad you're here. Whatever happens to peril will be upon any who enter this place. That was Traeger. I think my thoughts on that are quite well recorded by now.
Yes.
So what was the rhyme all about this week, Mr. H?
So they got made and enslaved, which I quite like, but I think they've done that one before.
Yeah, it doesn't really rhyme anyway. You can just about let it get away with that one.
Free and elvishly.
Again, I suppose we've got to let them get away with it. The final sound is the same. They both end in an E sound. Got to let them get away with it, but it's not. It's pushing the boundary a bit. Through and two is good but easy.
Rich and risk.
And then once again, it seems to lose heart around halfway through, doesn't it?
Yes.
Rich and risk do not rhyme. The last 2 letters of both are completely different. It's the first 2 letters of both that are the same.
Yeah, but at least there's sort of been an attempt.
No, there hasn't.
Kind of, compared to what's coming up.
That's not a rhyme. It's a reach him and please him. And then there comes the bit that doesn't even attempt to rhyme. But please, they did, and answered both questions with which them he probed. What is probed supposed to rhyme with? As far as we can see, nothing. There's nothing in there for it to rhyme with. And it's such a badly constructed bit of English. It's really mangled the structure of English. And I can understand doing that if it's as a bit of poetic license to make it rhyme. But this doesn't rhyme with anything. So why not just use a tidier sentence form? It's just completely ruined it by that point. It's terrible.
Let's face it, we never liked the dungeon ditties, really, did we? We just were viewing them through rose-tinted glasses.
I don't think it's even that. I think it's just we like the sound of the music playing in the background. It actually disguised how bad the rhymes were. It's only when we've sat down doing this and analysing we've realised how bloody awful they really are.
In a strange way, I will miss talking about them.
Especially as it means having to talk about Pickle reading from a book instead. But I do understand why, if Tim Chard was getting bored with writing these things, I can understand why. We haven't even finished the rhyme yet, have we? Oh, bloody hell.
We end on before and for, which is okay.
Just barely get away with that one. It's technically it's 2 different words. And then they pull the same dirty trick. They rhyme free as in freedom with 3 as in the number. Just barely on the right side of the borderline there for me. I'm giving that one 3 out of 10.
Oh, that's generous.
There have been worse ones. A lot of them, you have to let them get away with it on a technicality. It rises above the no points out of 10 category, but not far above it.
So to paraphrase Peter Venkman, I've worked with worse, but not many.
Exactly. Well, you're going to be littering Ghostbusters 2 quots throughout the podcast. I have no
just
objection
come in
if
naturally.
You do. Yeah, okay. Well, suck your gut in. You're supposed to be a hero. I know that isn't exactly the quotes, but I think everyone will recognise it.
Do, Ray,
Yeah.
Martin.
No, we can't say that. We're both Martin. The next one has to be Martin as well.
That's
and
true.
then plus we've got a Dungeoneer called Martin. So the one after that would also have to be a Martin.
I just call it St. Martin's then.
Yeah, you've destroyed the fabric of the space-time continuum with this logical paradox that you put into reality.
It's all because of my Carpathian kitten loss, I'm telling you.
It is, isn't it? Yes, you Carpathians. Do you know what? I once got bitten by a wolf in the Carpathians.
Do you know what? We go on about Ghostbusters and the real Ghostbusters so much. Shall we put it to a vote? Who reckons we should do like a one-off special just talking about Ghostbusters?
I'm up for it.
So let us know. Comment, tweet, whatever.
Generally, I would be up for that.
Are we going to talk about Filmation's Ghostbusters, though?
I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt and pretend you didn't suggest that. Not only is Filmation's Ghostbusters stupid with the gorilla called Tracy, Filmation behaved very badly over the creation of the real Ghostbusters cartoon. That's why it's called The Real Ghostbusters.
Yes, and that's a nice teaser for when we do the special.
Absolutely. We will discuss those things.
Where am I?
You're in like a cavern, a mine. It's got a rail track running along it to your left with a little truck on it, and there's an exit, but like a spider's web, a flashing spider's web keeps coming across it.
Ah, I hope I don't speak too soon, but you do seem to have lost the goblins, at least for the moment. This chamber is one of the exits from level 2 into level 3, but a weak force field guards the mining tunnel. Nonetheless, it's strong enough to prevent Martin from walking through it on foot. Decisions now, for life force is fading, and soon there'll be nothing left to decide.
We rejoin the team just as they exit the final segment of Death Valley, stroke the Dream Caverns, with goblins in pursuit.
It's a pity that the goblins don't appear to follow Martin into the corridor. It would have made the little trek through the corridor a little bit more interesting. It seems to be there's a threat developing because the goblins are on your tail. Oh, they've suddenly gone. Oh, that was easy. Just have them in the corridor as well, just to make things a bit more urgent. Plus, they could even appear in the mine entrance. And, well, the problem, I suppose, is you need Motley to fight them off. Maybe I didn't think that through. Okay, never mind. Carry on.
The advisors, Darren, Lee and James, whisper amongst themselves about what to do. Dungeoneer Martin is clearly getting a little mardy about this, and he rightly chastises them.
Stop whispering, okay?
Matter, peanut butter. None of that. Speak up. I think you agree, don't you?
Yeah, I like Martin as a Dungeoneer. I like a Dungeoneer who answers back.
Yes, he's a good Dungeoneer. Doesn't get enough credit, actually. He does get a bit mardy, but he's right to. Being Dungeoneer, he's the guy who's actually out there in the middle. He has to have a sort of leadership role, and he can't have any input if he doesn't know what's going on. So for God's sake, boys, speak up. You've been doing 2 levels of this. You should have got the hang of that by now.
The team decide to call Motley, who has promised to help them should they need it.
Motley!
I heard you. Have no worries, have no fear, because your friend Motley's here. Good.
Martin is actually very irritable in this thing because he doesn't so much call Motley as really bark at him.
Demands his presence.
Motley! It's funny how quickly Motley arrives. It means he must have been really close by. So then you start thinking, is Motley a stalker? But we won't go there.
Motley dutifully helps Martin into the minecart and gives him a shove.
Right, deep breath, sitting comfortably. And look out level 3, because here we be!
Hold on tight and keep your head down, Martin. The rest of you better warn him what's going on.
You're still in the car, as you can see, and you're travelling very fast down the tunnel.
Oh, good.
Which is lit by torches.
Right.
You're still on the rail track.
Martin looks really uncomfortable in this thing, doesn't he?
I'm not sure. I mean, initially, before Traeger tells him to keep his head down, he looks like he's slouching with the most appalling nonchalance. I can almost picture a dungeon maid sitting next to him, peeling off grapes and depositing them in his mouth. He's looking so horribly relaxed. He does start to look uncomfortable when he lowers his head.
He's kind of jammed in there sideways instead of like the more obvious lengthways.
I know, but it's the way he's got his arm draped sort of over there and sort of initially has his head back like that. I'm almost picturing Caesar surrounded by slaves waving a vine leaf up and down to keep him cool. It's
Do you think his armlet's draped? I think it looks like he's genuinely clinging on for dear life.
Oh, well, as the thing isn't really moving, I don't see any reason for that. But if it does look that way to you, that's good, because it makes the tunnel journey look even more spectacular than ever. It is one of the great level changes, is the minecart ride. Sadly, it's the last time we're going to see it, though.
Oh no, brace yourself for a crash, Martin. The end of the tunnel's coming up, the cart just won't slow down.
Hold on. Where am I? You're in a cavern still. There's like roots of trees growing down the walls. There's scattered bones along the floor. There's an object on the floor. Somewhere along the way.
Looks like a skull from here.
Are you all right, Martin?
Well, yeah.
Well, thank goodness for that. Well, stand quite still for a moment while I give you what warnings I can. There are cavern wights in level 3, as you know. But more recently, we've had reports of small bands of goblins. Worse still, sightings of a somewhat larger creature, which might even be a hobgoblin. However, the good news is guards are scarce, and most of the hostile ones lie behind you in level 2. That's enough for now. On with the quest, and keep a sharp lookout for any source of energy.
So Martin seems slightly unsure when Traegard asks him if he's all right, doesn't he?
Yeah, a genuine note, coincidentally enough, this scene, because of that, reminds me of an anecdote told by Gareth Thomas from when he was making Blake 7. There was a big scene in the second season where all the actors had to run across a field with pyrotechnics going off right behind them. And the last one that Gareth ran past, it actually blew up just as he was passing over it. And it sort of nearly burned his off. And he had to throw himself rapidly to the ground to avoid taking the full brunt of the blast. Once the explosions had stopped, the director called cut, asked the cameraman if they'd all got good shots of it, had a quick over to the sound engineer and said, had the sound been captured okay? Does anyone think we should go again? And just checking in with absolutely everybody in the crew for about the next 2 minutes or so. And everyone slowly says, yeah, looks good, no problems, yeah, it's fine. But then the director paused and then added, oh, by the way, Gareth, are you okay? And Mr. Thomas was unwilling after that display of total disinterest in his health to consider doing any retakes.
The skeleton room is back in all its gloomy glory. Somehow the relative sparseness of bones compared to earlier iterations makes it even more foreboding. There's something on the floor that the team send Martin to investigate, but it just turns out to be an animal skull. They decide to ignore it, and Martin leaves through the exit on the right.
What you're mentioning about the sparseness, there may be the less is more effect at play here. But I do still wish the chamber had been lit blue like before and not this sun yellow shading. It still looks a bit too cheerful for level 3. What I do rather like here is the strange waddle that Martin performs to avoid treading on the boat as he's walking out. Traegard seems amused too.
Okay, walk forward.
Where am I?
You're in a square room with a table in the centre. There's some stairs in front of you. 4 exits.
After a rarely seen yellow dwarf tunnel.
Look at this tunnel. Look how it's used by you. And dwarfs and goblins too. And it is all yellow.
Martin emerges at the top left flight of stairs in the level 3 clue room. Martin walks down the stairs and the team ask him to walk to the table without telling him where it is.
Yep. This is a very good team all in all, but you can see why they didn't win sometimes, can't you? Martin again showing a bit of leadership. They're like, where is it? On the table is a pie, which gets knapsacked. There's also a talisman, which the team debate about picking up. They seem unsure, and one of the advisors tells him not to do it. You can tell this is a hat with a brick under it, can't you?
Lift it up. Just lift it up.
Emergency, a distractor is here. Life force draining.
Put it down. Okay, step back.
So after potentially sending half the audience at home into epileptic seizures with the light effect that happens, the team decide that picking up the talisman wasn't a good idea and drop it back on the table. Not one of the most difficult choices they'll have ever had to make, I think.
No. It doesn't seem to have that much effect on them, though.
No, it doesn't. We have seen these sorts of things before. Here, it just, you pick it up, buzz, put it down again.
Yeah.
And your life force clock looks pretty much exactly the same as it was before. Maybe it wasn't that dangerous. So anyway, Traegard advises them to head downwards, so they guide Martin to the middle right door.
Where am I?
He's standing on the ledge. By the side of the ledge, there's something like the mouth of a dragon, and you can see its eyes. It's awake. There's an exit to your left.
Oh, hello.
Hello.
Are you going to talk to me then? Yes. It's not often that I get the opportunity to talk to a human. I suppose you don't think it's me that's talking, do you? I suppose you don't think a dragon can talk. Well, I can see. And what's more, I can do it without all that silly face flapping you humans going for. Telepathic as dragons. Superior, see?
I like the excuse that dragons are telepathic to excuse the lack of animation.
Yes, it's a bit obvious, isn't it? I mean, to be fair, it's actually more animated now than it was in season 2, but not much more animated, unfortunately.
It would look silly if it's jaws flapping up and down anyway.
It might very well do. They could sort of make the sides of the mouth sort of go open and closed without having the whole jaw moving.
Maybe.
It's no slow reveal this time, is there? So no danger of anybody saying it's a crocodile. The dragon appears to have the same name as the dragon in season 2, even though it's got a much friendlier demeanor, this one. Apparently the one in season 2 was also called Owen. This time it's voiced by Clifford Norgate, which is supposed to be Welsh.
Does occasionally slip into Scottish.
Yes, as a rather affectionate, soft, good-natured, avuncular sort of accent or voice. But is it Welsh? Is it actually Welsh?
Let's be honest, it's marginally better than your Brangwen.
Remind us of your Brangwen impersonation, please.
Okay.
Oh, moving on quickly from that. Oh, I wonder why. This chamber has actually been modified quite a bit. Still recognisable with the same chamber from season 2, of course, but in some ways it actually makes less sense than it used to. See, the dragon's sort of long nose, which can now snuffle a little bit, as we mentioned, is exactly where it was before, but there's no actual need for anyone to walk on it because the gap in the ground between the two doors is now filled in. So it gives the impression that the worm has got his face stuck in that position. I do sometimes wonder if it might be better to scrap the room altogether and just replace it with some kind of cavern with more of the dragon visible underneath it. On a matter of accuracy, I've checked that the name Owen is indeed Welsh for noble. It also means youthful, and it has to be a combination of the two. It has to be a young noble, is what it means.
Which spelling are we going for?
I would go with Owen because it's just easiest to remember. There's the Irish spelling is Eoin, as in Owen Morgan, an Irish guy who was an England cricketer. Don't ask me to explain that.
I was thinking of Owen Coulter, the author.
Indeed, yes. Also in Scotland, a lot of people have the Irish spelling of the name, but they pronounce it Ian. So I'm not sure if there is actually a direct link between the name Ian and Owen.
Now, before you rush off, would you like to earn some dragon magic then?
Yes, please.
Right. Listen.
The Hercules, the Stag, the Bombardier, the Devil's Coach Horse, and the Caterpillar are all forms of what? Don't say dragons.
I can understand their thinking for this one.
Yeah. So it is actually quite a plausible answer. It's more likely to be names of ships rather than types of ships, though, isn't it? But yeah, I can understand them going for this one. Yeah. It's not an easy question. I didn't get it when I first saw it. I also didn't get it when I watched it for a second time about 6 or 7 years later. It is a tricky one. You do have to have some specialist knowledge to know this one.
They answer ships, which, as I say, is a plausible answer, and you can understand their thinking. But unfortunately, it's not the correct answer.
No, it's not actually objects at all. It's animals. Specifically,
it's a beetle, isn't it?
So Owen tells them that if they're ignorant, they have to remain so, which I've never been sure exactly what that means. Is he saying it's impossible for people to ever learn anything? I'd have thought if anybody's ignorant, they need teaching, not to remain ignorant. But,
yeah.
Oh, well, we've got to remember that he's talking from the perspective of sort of a British education system. So in that regard, history shows he's absolutely correct. Anyway, he allows himself a slightly mischievous chuckle And very dejected, the team lead Martin out through the only exit. Spoiler alert! The team are now in losing status.
And they know it.
Yeah, it does seem a little harsh.
You can tell by the looks on their faces that they know they have lost. But onwards, anyway.
Where am I?
You're in a room with a table to your right. There's a flashing sword above the letter M on the table.
Caution, this haunting has been sent by Morghanna. Team, Martin must reach the table to summon Merlin.
When they arrive in the Jericho 6 chamber! Sound the wall.
Martin's life force is reaching a critical level and he needs sustenance. As is stated, there's a yellow letter M on the table that is being guarded by a sword haunting moving slowly up and down. There's a narrow window for Martin to reach out and touch the letter. The team move Martin to the letter and he manages to sweep the table.
Oh, Martin! Well done. A bonté, Spectre. Now, Martin, I say, you look in a poor way. Spellcasting. E-R-G. That's better. Life force status green, which is as it should be.
Merlin does chatter a bit here, doesn't he? Martin's almost dead before he finishes the spell.
Yeah, once again, he makes a real dog's breakfast of casting the spell. He doesn't actually have an awful lot to say here, Merlin, but he does take his time about it. I'd have thought, given how well they've done and how difficult that question from the dragon was, perhaps they could have given him a second chance to get some kind of defense against Morghanna from this meeting, maybe get him to ask him another riddle or some such thing. Apart from them giving him the life force boost, which you can do just as easily with a life force sprig, it doesn't really actually say or do anything of any particular purpose.
After our interview with Tim Child recently, which you guys wouldn't have heard yet, but it is coming, I promise, I do wonder if he was kind of pushing back at the people saying, oh, more people have to win at this point.
That is possible. If there's ever a time when you start thinking we're not getting enough winners on this programme, it has to be season 3.
Merlin warns the team and Traegard that Morghanna has moved from the old realm and entered the dungeon through the deeper catacombs. He says that her nature is fey, suggesting that she is an evil fairy, and her purpose is fell.
You got to remember that her full name, according to Arthurian legend, is Morghanna le Fay. So that's probably the reason he actually says that. In most versions of the legend, she is the half-brother of Arthur. Although actually in earlier versions of the Welsh legend, she's not related to him at all and not actually an evil character. She was originally meant as one of the maidens of Avalon who take Arthur's body across the water after his death at the Battle of Camlan. Not a lot of people know that. The later story states that she is the eldest child of Igraine, who's Arthur's later mother, and her husband Galwar, who is not Arthur's father. Galwar is the Duke of Cornwall, not long after the fall of the Roman Empire. Igraine is tricked by Merlin's sorcery into sleeping with Uva Pendragon. I'm not sure that our correspondent in the field should be listening to this bit, by the way, but Arthur is conceived, and Morghanna grows to resent her brother for being born from her mother's humiliation, and that resentment is what hardens into hatred and evil. Now, the Morghanna we see in Nightmare appears very much to be that version of the character, and not the maid from the Avalon version, which means that this Merlin guy that was this rather kind, doddery old soul has quite a big skeleton in his cupboards, doesn't he? Ladies and gentlemen, every time you're looking at Merlin as this rather kindly, rather doddery, almost innocent guy, have a think about that. So anyway, he tells Martin not to trust Morghanna, but to step bravely, as he only has a short way to go. It's quite exciting to hear him say only have a short way to go, but all he's really saying is don't trust the arch-villain. We should hope that that goes without saying.
Where am I?
You're in a square room with 3 exits. On the far wall, the wall to your left and the wall to your right. There's a large square hole in the middle of the floor, and by it, on the edge, there's a piece of our chalice, it looks like.
Yes, there's something here you must have, team, but beware treachery.
I call it Car's level 3 lair.
Yeah.
It's adapted from the old combat chest room from season 2. I'm not sure this is a better use for it, if I'm being perfectly honest, because the chessboard design actually stops making any sense once you've turned it into a snake house.
I miss talking about the combat chess.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
Like whispered voices and that.
Yeah, I like the way we do the. Shall we check the video and then we can describe the path he walks out using chess moves, using the square numbers, just in a hushed voice, just for nostalgia's sake. No, okay.
It's too hot.
It is, yeah. Just for the benefit of the listeners, we're doing this on the hottest day of the year.
It was actually the hottest day of the year up to that point. Later on in the month, it got a heck of a lot hotter.
If we sound a little bit weak, there's a reason for it. Anyway, the team guide Martin to the chalice piece that's here, and as he picks it up, we hear Morghanna laughing again.
Stop.
Car emerges from the hole, so the team make a hasty escape, which, as usual, isn't actually that difficult because, as usual, it's just a video recording of the snake, and therefore it's not actually there and it's not really chasing them. The next chamber has a real threat in it, and it's a really effective threat.
Right, walk forward.
Where am I?
You're in a cavern. There's 2 exits in the far end. To your left, in the corner, amongst some rubble, there's a sprite of energy, so head for that. Okay, watch out for the rubble door.
So this is where the episode really starts to get pretty high gear.
This is what we would usually refer to as the Cavern White Chamber. There's no Cavern Whites in it today.
Well, I actually rather wondered what happened to them. If they were there as well as the threat that does emerge, it would be a hell of a dangerous chamber to be in.
There is a sprite of energy next to the blocked off exit. Martin's life force is still quite good, but the team decide to go for it anyway. Just as they reach it, though.
Keep going.
Extreme warning, Dean, a hobgoblin in the level.
Sidestep to your right.
Absolutely massive hobgoblin walks in from the bottom of the screen, followed by one of his normal-sized brethren.
The normal-sized goblin just makes it clearer how big this hobgoblin is.
Absolutely, that's what has to be there.
Yeah.
It's to emphasize the fact this is a giant goblin. It's not just a regular goblin. The effect actually still works remarkably well even today. It actually really does stand up. As far as we know, according to Keith McDonald writing on the Nightmare website, it was achieved by a pre-recorded video spliced over the live footage of Martin and the smaller goblin. The smaller goblin is genuinely in the studio. The larger goblin isn't. To create the illusion of increased size, all they've done is they've had the actor stand much bit closer to the camera. But it works. It really does work. It still works over 30 years later. I remember this scene absolutely had me shaking in terror back in 1989. It doesn't have the same effect on me now, but it still makes for a major bit of tension, even if you are used to it. And it's reinforced well by the ominous chords of music that are used. Some of the edge is taken off a little bit by the way the hobgoblin fails to pursue as Martin heads for the door, and instead it stays rooted to the spot and repeatedly glances around. So it rather gives away the fact that it isn't really there. But even so, it still makes you jump when it appears on the screen. And it's a pity that we didn't see more of the hobgoblin in this quest. If they'd done it, used it the way they used to use the automaton of always having it pursuing in room after room, it would have really been something.
It's the first of 2 great jump scares in this episode.
It is. It certainly is. This is not the only time we encounter the giant incarnation of the goblins. In season 5, a sadistic goblin master called Scar Kill had one in captivity going by the name of Tiny. Oh, God. These goblin masters are real characters. They really are. Tiny would also appear in season 6. Plus, another hobgoblin would appear in that season as a pupil in a scene in which Hordrus the Confuser is holding a magic class for budding sorcerers. In season 8, I don't think the hobgoblins appeared in season 8. I think by then they were replaced by the even bigger but less agile Myotrogs. But there is a pattern of them appearing for much of the rest of Nightmare's history.
But despite the added threat and a slightly obscured view, Martin does make it to the next chamber.
Walk forward.
Where am I?
You're in a large square room. There's 2 large statues of cats. They're both wearing necklaces. Every so often a bolt is fired from their eyes. And at certain times this causes a floor to appear, otherwise there'd be like a hole which you'd fall through. and after that, there's our exit.
The next chamber is a bit of a come down, unfortunately. It's the Sphinx room.
I enjoy the Sphinx room still, but there's not really much to say about it here, is there?
The laser bolts from the cat's eyes still seem irrelevant. All the team actually need to do is time for when the floor is intact, and the laser bolts don't fire at that time, so nothing else really matters. So I've always been a little bit nonplussed by this room, as I do think it's been pointlessly overdeveloped.
I think it's just to make it look a bit more animated.
Yeah, the presentation of it isn't actually scary, and it's not simplistic enough for what's such a basic puzzle. I wouldn't say it does any harm, but it would work exactly the same way if the cats weren't there at all.
When they're gearing him up to run across, though, his legs so tense.
Yeah.
He's actually shaking.
He's probably worried that the hobgoblin is still behind him. The scene would actually be a lot better if, just as he's moving across the gap, the hobgoblin suddenly walks in. That would have made for a much better scene.
No. Go! No. Yeah, good. Right, walk forward.
Where am I?
You're in a large room with 4 pathways leading from it. Once you get down the stairway, that is. There's a stained glass window to your left. There's a piece of our chalice as well. So can you go down the stairs, please?
The next chamber is one of my all-time favourites. It's the stained glass window. Now, of course, last season, stained glass window was effectively the penultimate location in the dungeon. So that suggests he's on the threshold of victory. Oh my goodness. And it's always a very iconic chamber. It's beautiful. It's slightly haunting. It's literally iconic, and it's figuratively iconic. But they find a dramatic new use for the window this time.
Oh, yes.
This is the second superb jump moment of the episode.
So Martin's arrival in the stained glass window room is a welcome one, as it signifies that he's very near the victory point of his quest. It's also apparent that he doesn't have the customary magic needed to beat the chamber. However, there is a piece of the chalice on one of the paths. The team guide him over it, and having collected it, he continues on the path. Before he reaches the end, though...
Enough of foolishness and enough of fools.
Morghanna smashes her way through the window.
Genuinely one of the most terrifying moments in the entire show.
Definitely. One of the reasons why I still prefer the first 3 seasons is because it's scarier.
And just the vision of her floating there, and the language she uses, almost Old English, but not quite. And she just straight out fucking kills him.
You have been lucky so far, but now my curiosity is exhausted. My delight lies on the dark side, so I stoop to extinguish your flame. Darius Shiva, an end to the quest.
Modred never did that.
Well, not yet.
Not yet, no, but she's literally just like she's been watching this quest and she's like, I'm bored now.
Yeah. Yeah, Morghanna is a different character to Modred, and her motivations aren't the same.
Yeah.
So Modred is a blusterer a lot of the time, and although as he demonstrates early in season 4, he does have the power to be genuinely lethal. He doesn't often exercise it. Morghanna isn't like that. Morghanna is the character from the sort of the Thomas Mallory version of the Arthurian legend.
Morghanna is the dictionary definition of a psychopath.
Yeah, she's more curious about Dungeoneers than eager to scare them into a mistake. So she just sits back and observes them a lot at the time. But once she feels she's learned all she needs to know about this particular Dungeoneer, she's a lot more direct about attacking. And it means the gameplay in season 3 has become higher stakes, because she's one of the enemies now. That's one of the reasons why season 3 is more difficult, because you've got to get past Morghanna. And of course they can't, because they didn't get the magic that would have protected them.
Morghanna, it seems, has struck again. I'm awfully sorry about this, boys, because we had great hopes for you. But without dragon magic, I'm afraid you were no match for Morghanna.
Maybe there's the point in there about Merlin not providing them with magic either. Maybe he doesn't have anything that can protect them against her. One of the parts of the legend is that Morghanna supplants Merlin as the greatest sorceress in the land, because she becomes more powerful than him.
And the point is that if we go by the book continuity, the Nightmare Challenge is just that. It's a challenge, and it's preset. They know what's going to happen. Morghanna seems to have arrived here, maybe not by accident, but without any kind of plan for her. They don't know what to do. They don't know if she's even beatable.
The way I read it, Morghanna basically dies, not not long before Arthur dies in the physical world. And because Excalibur, because Mordred and Arthur both die, their magic weapons die with them. The path back to our world is closed to them. It's only when the Gruagach creates Nightmare Castle with its interdimensional dungeons that a pathway back to the real world is finally opened to her. She dies in ancient Britain and sort of wakes up in post-conquest England, a rather different world. If you actually go to the books, she appears as the arch-villain in the storyline section of The Sorcerer's Isle. She pretends to be a maid called Erica, but is really Morghanna Le Fay.
But anyway, the team are gone, unfortunately, and Treguard does something quite unexpected.
Now you must rejoin Martin. Spellcasting, unite. U-N-I-T-E. Farewell, Martin, Lee, Jamie, and Darren. Hurry home.
Take me down to the path by the cliffs, give a dike on my scroll and my chin gap dismissed. Oh, marching please, take me home.
This is a nice way of commending the team that came closest to being the series champions. And I think they are the series champions.
They're the champions by default, yeah. But I still think Richard's team in season 1 may feel a bit narked that nobody thought of using it for them. It's a nice gesture, I suppose. It's not really going to be much of a consolation to them, though, I don't think. Looking at the team there, 2 of them are actually literally holding their heads and covering their eyes. You actually get the feeling that one of them was on the brink of crying there. So you can feel just how close they got. It must be really genuinely quite painful to get that close.
Because they knew how close they were, didn't they?
Yeah, they knew they were a bit of a way back where they went astray, but you do feel that they should have had some kind of second chance to earn something to fight against Morghanna with. Oh well.
And we must hurry too, for the time of challenge is fast fading. Enter, stranger. Welcome. Your name at once, please.
Christopher Reed.
We must hurry, Chris, for this phase of the dungeon is drawing to a close. Quickly, call your advisors.
James, Alex, Tim.
So, it's on to the final quest of the season.
The team introduction begins with Dungeoneer Christopher Reed.
He's joined by advisors James Golding, Alex Corrigan, and Tim Childsworth.
Yeah.
Surely not.
They all hail from Bristol. Treguard's really rushing things along now, and within about 30 seconds, he's sending Christopher into the dungeon. Literally, I timed it.
Yeah, good thing too. Yeah, I like that.
Turn now, face the door, and away you go.
Where am I?
You're in a green room, and it's all green, walls, floor, everything. And in front of you, to your left, there's a table with 3 of the sides up and a dice on it.
Believe me, team. In any quest, there are certain random elements and certain ways of deciding how to begin. One of the oldest is here present, but I'm sure you'll know how to deal with it.
Welcome to the dungeon. This is season 3. Everything is still the same. Our talking is mundane. We try to make it seem random. Our dice is on the exact same number. We'd better play the game. We'd better play and never talk about it. So welcome to the dungeon.
I think we should have a fanfare here.
Just to celebrate the fact that it's over. They're still taking too long, this team, to figure out that they need to roll the die. I am not going to miss this chamber in later seasons. Anyway, the shield adorns the middle door, and this is the door the team choose. And they go through it. Right, move on. We're never going to have to discuss the dice room again! Yay!
Where am I?
You're standing on a ledge on a cliff with a drop to your right. In front of you, there's a man standing with his arms crossed, and he's meditating.
Careful, team. This vision of pride is Hordris the Confuser. Encounters with him are best avoided, for like all who dabble in magic, he is sudden and unpredictable. Whatever you say, just make sure you're polite. For if he takes against you, there's no knowing what might happen. I think flattery could be useful here.
The team advised Chris to approach Hordris carefully and to introduce himself politely.
Can I just interrupt you there?
Yes.
Thank you. Carry on.
So
I stole that joke from Fry and Laurie. That season of Fry and Laurie was also in 1989, funnily enough. It's an old joke.
Thank you for your joke from 1989.
Now, just let me stop you there.
This approach... Well... Damn you. I'm going to start again. The team advised Chris to approach Hordris...
Well, we've got to go all the way back
no,
to the
you
discussing
can't interrupt. The
All
team
right,
advised Chris to approach
I'll be
Hordris
quiet.
carefully
I'll
and
let you carry
introduce
on
himself
without the
politely.
slightest
This approach doesn't really work,
interruption of
though, as
sound. I
Hordris
won't
takes
speak
offense
over you
to...
anyway.
Shut the fuck up! The team advised Chris...
We're not going that far back, then.
To approach Hordris carefully and to introduce himself politely.
I'll just interrupt there.
No! This approach doesn't really work, though.
So you don't want me to interrupt there?
As Hordris takes offence to Chris's presence before he has a chance to speak.
Oh, I see. So Chris is allowed to interrupt, but I'm not. Is that the way of it now? Huh? Oh, I get it. Oh, right. I see. I understand then. There's a pecking order. I'm below Chris in the pecking order. Is that
Chris
what we're
doesn't
saying?
interrupt. Hordris does. And you're definitely below Hordris.
Oh, so there's a pecking order and I'm below Hordris, even though Hordris is a fictional character.
Yes.
Bloody hell, that makes me feel even worse.
There's me, there's fictional characters, there's amoebas, and then there's you.
That should be the title for this week. For this podcast. There's me, there's fictional characters, there's Amoebae, and then there's you. That's the title for this week's podcast. It's perfect.
Okay, edge crossing one. The team advised Chris
So we're starting again, are we?
Hordris carefully and introduce himself politely. This approach doesn't really work. Hordris takes offence to Chris's presence before he has a chance to speak.
Go away, you tiresome person of small significance. What gives you the right to interrupt matters of high incantation? Be gone, I say.
This is the first real attempt to use Hordris as something other than just a dungeon guard or a substitute war monster.
I really like the close camera angles they're using as well.
Yeah, but it's also more than that. I like the use of Hordris here because they're broadening him. Rather than just having him giving out arcane clues or threatening the dungeoneers without provocation, here we get quite elaborate side plot being stepped up, tapping more story potential from his moral ambiguity. So it worked rather well and is rather intriguing to watch. And it actually serves as the prototype for a frequent use of Hordris for much of season 4, this particular side plot they created. But also in season 4, they have Malice doing the same role.
The advisors tell Chris to apologise.
Oh, God, are we still on that?
The advisors tell Chris to apologise and to call Hordris a flattering name.
I'm sorry to have disturbed you, Your Grace.
Ah, your manner at least shows signs of some respect.
He says that he knows why Chris is here and suggests a pact. He offers the dungeoneer some magic to help him progress if he agrees to collect a simple object. An hourglass has been left in the level, and Hordris desires it. This is like what you were talking about. This carries on into season 4, doesn't it?
Yeah, this is the prototype of what Hordris' regular role is for a lot of season 4. I'd argue that it's not really varied enough in season 4. It's one of the many problems of season 4. It's too repetitive.
Before the team can agree or disagree, though.
Warning, temporal disruption imminent. Too late again. What we could do with round here is a decent, accurate sandglass. No more from Chris in this phase, I'm afraid. And no more from you lot either. And you? Well, if you want more, you'll just have to rejoin us when time turns once again. Yes, join us again soon for Nightmare. And remember, to stay alive in the game, all you have to do is stay alive.
I'm not sure whether Trey Guns grumbles about needing a sandglass or a reference to what Hordris was saying, but either way, he won't be getting it because Hordris needs it.
They do get one later on, though.
They do. They most certainly do. This is quite a powerful episode for long stretches, and it is one of the best of season 3, with probably the best team of the season.
Yeah.
And I would definitely say the best Dungeoneer of the season.
Definitely. It has its flaws. The Sphinx room is a waste of time, but my God, that death, though.
It is a really, really formidable moment. It really does establish just how dangerous the dungeon is meant to be.
Genuinely one of the most frightening moments in the show.
Yes, the team get very close to winning outright, so we get to see bits of the dungeon that we don't see very often. And there's some refreshing and murky chambers in level 3 we get a glance at. There's a new, genuinely scary monster in the Hobgoblin, which we shouldn't overlook. And the story moved at a fair pace as well. The one slightly bitter taste in the mouth for me is that feeling of harshness about not being given any chance at all when Morghanna arrived. It does feel rough, but as you say, on the other hand, it does re-establish just how deadly the dungeon is. So if you don't like it, maybe we should just say, well, that's tough. I think that is probably what Tim would say.
Is this Morgana's final appearance, or does she appear in Series 4 as well?
She does not appear in Series 4, but her costume does. Malice takes over. I think it's just that Natasha Pope wasn't available for Season 4 because she was pregnant. So they decided to just invent a new character who's similar called Malice. And they got Samantha Perkins.
I do like, though, that if an actor can't reprise their role, instead of giving the role to someone else, they create a new one for them.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I will say this about it, that Morghanna, you don't really experience much of her personality at all because she only appears in a couple of scenes in the entire season, whereas Malice is used a lot. She appears in all the levels and has some pretty dominant roles. And she's actually quite an ambiguous figure. In some ways, she's more from Hordris's camp than she is from Mogdred's, even though she's wearing the robe of Mogdred's sidekick. So in some ways, you could argue that it was better getting rid of Morghanna and bringing in Malice.
Do you think it would have been interesting to see Hordris take on the role of the big bad a couple of times?
It would have been. The problem really was that they wanted Hordris to sort of eventually to take over from Merlin, which he did. So you can't really have it established as an arch villain in one season and then suddenly have him be the avuncular sorcerer in the next one.
I guess not. Right. You can follow us on Twitter. We're at NightmarePod.
If you want to support the podcast, we're NightmarePod on Patreon.
Speaking of Patreon, here to shout out to Keepers of the Book of Quests, Peter Pulsford, David N. Rabbit, and our newest supporter, Paul McIntosh.
Advisors Benjamin Bloom, Peter Sidorn, David Thompson, and Stephen Whelan.
And Dungeoneer Peter Corridge.
Support us on Patreon at Dungeoneer level or above to get your name mentioned on the podcast. Higher level perks also receive merchandise, have access to exclusive episodes, and if you pledge as a keeper of the Book of Quests, we'll even offer you the chance to be a guest on the podcast.
Our website is nightmarepod.co.uk.
If you're looking for Temporal Discussion merchandise, including t-shirts, stickers, and other assorted products, sadly, especially emblazoned condoms, are not yet available. It's at nightmarepod.redbubble.com.
You can email us at podcast@nightmarepod.co.uk.
And just keep telling yourself it's only a podcast.
Isn't it? There's dungeons and more on blue screens into the tavern scene. Dickon and team, Lady Jeremy, Charles, Christopher, from the castle to the forest to the increased heifer. Trip to the Heifer Series 4 and 5. Well, it's a trip to the Heifer Series 4 and 5. Trip to the Heifer Series 4 and 5. Well, it's a trip to the Heifer Series 4 and 5. And extras, they serve in the inn, their Melly's in the inn. Zoe Lupton, she's the maid who plays with the jester, and the one who Dick and lied to about the old Colchester. Trip to the Heifer Series 4 and 5. Well, it's a trip to the Heifer Series 4 and 5. Trip to the Heifer Series 4 and 5. Well, it's a trip to the Heifer Series 4 and 5. Every tavern needs a Molly and a Millie. Every tavern needs a Molly. Every tavern needs a Molly and a Millie. Every tavern needs a Molly in Series 4 and 5. And Kelly, negotiating goblins and the skeleton heads. Didn't get a hint to pick up the crayon, and that made her a victim for the yoga to pray on. Grimwald McKelly and she couldn't thrive. Well, wait, no, Grimwald McKelly and she couldn't thrive. Then for some others helped them stay alive. Well, wait, no, Grimwald McKelly and she couldn't thrive. Everybody needs a crayon, not a Grimmy. Everybody needs a crayon. Everybody needs a crayon, not a Grimmy. Everybody needs a crayon. Everybody needs a crayon, not a Grimmy. Everybody needs a crayon. Everybody needs a crayon, not a Grimmy. Everybody needs a crayon. Everybody needs a crayon, not a Grimmy. Everybody needs a crayon, or your life force will dive. Big fall for rations and the end arrived. It was a big fall for rations and the end arrived. Big fall for rations and the end arrived. It was a big fall for rations and the end arrived. Every comeback needs a Hugo and an Izzy. Every comeback needs a Hugo. Every comeback needs a Hugo and an Izzy. Every comeback needs a Hugo. Every comeback needs a Hugo and an Izzy. Every comeback needs a Hugo. Every comeback needs a Hugo and an Izzy. Every comeback needs a Hugo. And Melly and Motley and Millie and Molly and Kelly and Grimmy and Crayons and Growling and Hugo and Izzy and Ashens and U2 and Slice Me and Dice Me and Dropping. Ooh, nasty Nightmare and Anglia.